In her dreams, Kiều An Hảo thought about it, but then she couldn't think anymore, her tears flowing uncontrollably. That one sentence was like a nightmare. No matter who he liked, it was never going to be her. It would never be her. From that moment until now, it had been a year in middle school, 3 years in high school, and 4 years of university, 8 years of silently loving him. The long journey of 8 years was nothing more than her single-minded love for him. For him, she worked hard, pretended to be foolish, dreamed of him at night, and thought of him during the day. Her entire world was him. But in the end, he told her that no matter who he liked, it would never be her. Her unrequited love had been cut off before it even had the chance to bloom. From then on, her love for him remained her own secret. At first, she avoided him, and eventually they stopped meeting altogether. Occasionally, she would hear about him through Hứa Gia Mộc, learning that he had become a rising star in the entertainment industry. She knew he had bought Huanying Media, and he had even won the Best Actor award. In truth, even if Hứa Gia Mộc didn't tell her, she would still have known. He became famous nationwide, and any little bit of news about him was enough to become a headline, causing a stir. Even years later, whether she intentionally avoided him or not, she would still see him everywhere. Posters of him filled the streets, and shopping malls were plastered with his images as brand ambassadors. She knew he didn't love her, but every time she walked down the street and saw his pictures, she would become dazed and staring at them, as if trying to see if he had changed at all from her memories. Thinking of this, Kiều An Hảo couldn't help but sob softly again in her dream. Crying and crying, Kiều An Hảo woke up from her dream. She opened her eyes, dazed, staring at the familiar bedroom for a long while, before realizing that she had a long dream, and the pillow was soaked from her tears. Kiều An Hảo glanced at the clock on the wall. It was already midnight. She had come home earlier, taken her medicine, and slept straight through until now. She got out of bed, went to the bathroom to wash her face, then took her medicine. Stepping out of her bedroom, she went downstairs to the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water. After taking her medicine, she took a packet of dumplings from the fridge and started cooking some. She sat alone at the dining table, head down, focused on eating. When she had eaten about half of her dumplings, Kiều An Hảo heard a car outside. She instinctively turned her head, seeing headlights flash through the living room window. She tightened her grip on the chopsticks, staring at the dumplings in the bowl for a moment. Then she heard the sound of the living room door creaking open. Lục Cẩn Niên entered inside. As Kiều An Hảo finished half of her dumplings, she heard the sound of a car outside. Instinctively, she turned her head and saw headlights flash through the living room window. She tightened her grip on the chopsticks and lowered her head, focusing on the remaining dumplings. Then, the living room door creaked open and Lục Cẩn Niên stepped inside. Kiều An Hảo stole a quick glance at him as he stood by the door, taking off his shoes. She immediately looked down again, continuing to eat the dumplings, trying to act casual. Her posture now, compared to when she had been alone in the villa earlier, seemed no different, but only she knew how her palms were sweating, gripping the chopsticks tightly. Lục Cẩn Niên entered the living room, casually tossing his coat on the sofa. He reached for his tie, glancing toward the brightly lit kitchen. He saw Kiều An Hảo sitting alone at the table, eating something. His hand paused as he tugged at his tie, then turned to look at the clock in the living room. It was almost 1 a.m., and his brows furrowed slightly. He tossed his tie onto the sofa and turned to head upstairs. After a few steps, he hesitated, as if remembering something. His steps faltered, and he turned toward the kitchen instead. Kiều An Hảo was still focused on her dumplings, but her attention was entirely on Lục Cẩn Niên. Though she didn't look at him directly, she listened for every sound he made. As he began heading upstairs, she quietly exhaled in relief, but to her surprise, he turned back toward the kitchen. His footsteps grew closer, and she felt a knot tighten in her chest. Her actions became stiffer as she continued to eat. From the living room, Lục Cẩn Niên couldn't see what Kiều An Hảo was eating, so he walked into the kitchen. Seeing her with a plate of frozen dumplings, his frown deepened. His lips twitched slightly as though he wanted to ask something, but ultimately didn't. Instead, he walked to the fridge, opened it, and found only a few bottles of water and some more frozen dumplings and instant noodles. He stared at the fridge for a moment, then grabbed a bottle of water, tilting his head back, drank deeply, leaning against the fridge. With him so close, Kiều An Hảo felt uneasy. She quickly finished the remaining dumplings, then stood up to wash the plate, drying her hands hastily before heading upstairs.
Kiều An Hảo washed her face and stepped out of the bathroom when Lục Cẩn Niên happened to open the bedroom door at the same time. Since the bathroom was right next to the bedroom, they almost bumped into each other. Kiều An Hảo body trembled slightly. Instinctively, she wanted to look up at the man in front of her, but she lacked the courage. In the end, she lowered her head and quickly walked into the bedroom. Lục Cẩn Niên glanced indifferently at her retreating figure, then pushed the bathroom door open and entered. Exhausted from her cold, Kiều An Hảo collapsed onto the bed, closing her eyes. As she drifted in and out of sleep, the sound of running water from the bathroom caught her attention. She suddenly realized that Lục Cẩn Niên was likely planning to stay the night. Reluctantly, she forced herself to get out of bed and went to the closet to change, grabbing her large teddy bear. As she walked toward the bed, Lục Cẩn Niên emerged from the bathroom wrapped in a towel, drying his hair with a towel in his hand. Noticing Kiều An Hảo holding the large teddy bear, his action of drying his hair paused for a moment. Then his cold expression returned as he moved to the vanity, grabbed the hair dryer, and began drying his hair. Through the reflection in the mirror, he saw Kiều An Hảo place the bear on the bed, lift the blanket, and lie down with her back to him, facing the edge of the bed. Lục Cẩn Nien's face darkened. He couldn't help but increase the speed of the hairdryer, drying his hair quickly before tossing it onto the vanity. Turning around, his cold gaze swept toward the bed. Despite the large bear in between them, Kiều An Hảo still lay near the edge of the bed, her body almost pressed flat against it, continuing to sleep. Instinctively, Kiều An Hảo felt Lục Cẩn Niên staring at her. Her body stiffened, and she buried her face deeper into the pillow, realizing it was damp. She paused, remembering she had cried a lot in her dream earlier. Kiều An Hảo knew Lục Cẩn Niên probably didn't care about the pillow, but she still feared he might notice her tears. She quietly pulled the pillow further under the covers. Lục Cẩn Niên watched her small movement, noticing she seemed to be trying to distance herself from him. His eyes lingered on her beautiful face for a moment before his eyelids fluttered slightly. Then he turned and left the room. Kiều An Hảo waited until the bedroom door closed, then opened her eyes and quickly flipped her pillow over before lying down again. After about 5 minutes, the bedroom door opened again. Lục Cẩn Niên entered with a stack of papers in hand, walked to the bed, and looked down at Kiều An Hảo, who was pretending to sleep, and threw the papers onto the nightstand beside her.
A few pages fell, swept by the gentle breeze, brushing against Kiều An Hảo face. Her long lashes fluttered, and she opened her eyes, immediately noticing the elegant fingers of the man pointing to the top right corner of the paper. His indifferent voice followed, "Sign here," before he turned and walked toward the changing room. Kiều An Hảo waited until the door to the changing room closed before sitting up. She picked up the stack of papers from the nightstand. She glanced through them quickly, and her brows furrowed. It was a contract, an endorsement deal for a cosmetics brand. This particular brand was a top-tier luxury cosmetic company, and the spokespeople in the country were always renowned figures in the industry. Lục Cẩn Niên wanted her to sign, meaning he was offering her the endorsement deal for this prestigious brand? Kiều An Hảo felt like she was in a dream, overwhelmed, and it all seemed too unreal. Lục Cẩn Niên emerged from the changing room, now dressed in clean clothes, holding a tie in his hand. He stood in front of the mirror. His eyes, both indifferent and profound, glanced at Kiều An Hảo through the reflection and asked, "Signed yet?" Kiều An Hảo snapped back to reality at his voice. She shook her head, then hesitated, looking up at him, her eyes filled with disbelief as she asked, "This endorsement deal is for me?" Lục Cẩn Niên gave a soft, almost unnoticeable, "Is it really for her?" Kiều An Hảo felt a small spark of joy, but doubt crept in. Why would Lục Cẩn Niên offer her such a great opportunity? Lục Cẩn Niên quickly tied his tie, then walked over to the bed, noticing the space on the contract where she had yet to sign. He frowned slightly and said flatly, "Why haven't you signed? Didn't you say you were interested in cosmetic endorsements?" Kiều An Hảo snapped back from her thoughts at his words. She reached for the pen by the bedside. But as she touched the paper, she couldn't help but ask, "Why are you giving me this endorsement deal?" "This is what you deserve," Lục Cẩn Niên replied in his usual indifferent tone. "Deserve?" Kiều An Hảo was even more confused by his words. Lục Cẩn Niên stared at her for a moment, his expression unchanged. Then, after a pause, he coolly added, "It's payment for last night." Payment for last night? So this was the compensation for their one-time encounter? Kiều An Hảo froze for a moment, processing his words. Then, her fingers clenched tightly around the pen, and the small joy she had felt earlier vanished, frozen in an instant.
Kiều An Hảo stared at the contract in front of her, the same one that had left her lost in thought. Now, all she felt was humiliation. Lục Cẩn Niên watched her for a long time, noticing she hadn't moved an inch. His brow furrowed slightly. His usual cold aura intensified as he spoke, his voice like ice. "What, are you dissatisfied with the terms of this endorsement contract?" At the sound of his voice, Kiều An Hảo fingers trembled slightly around the pen. Without a word, she slowly signed the paper. If only Kiều An Hảo knew how much this moment would haunt her. If she had known that her first time in bed with Lục Cẩn Niên, her casual excuse, would lead to this cycle of humiliation, she would never have asked for a role in Zilao Tianhuang. She truly wanted to refuse signing this contract, but the situation had been set in motion by her own actions. No matter how much she tried to find an excuse, she couldn't. 13 years ago, she loved him, too shy to confess. 13 years later, she still loved him, but now she hid that love with everything she had. The greatest distance in life isn't standing in front of someone without them knowing you love them, but standing in front of them and not daring to let them see that love. Tears welled in Kiều An Hảo eyes as she signed the last line. She held the pen at the end for a while longer, trying to hold back the tears until they finally subsided. She placed the pen down and handed the contract to Lục Cẩn Niên. Her calmness seemed to make Lục Cẩn Niên uneasy, like something inside him was about to burst. He suddenly glanced at the teddy bear on the bed. His face hardened as he spoke coldly to Kiều An Hảo. "This company has one condition. You cannot endorse any other cosmetics brand during this contract. Violated, and you'll face criminal responsibility and heavy compensation. I'm telling you now so you understand. Remember this clearly. If you break the contract, it's straight to prison, and you'll pay the damages yourself. Don't expect Huanying Media to help you with a single cent." After speaking, Lục Cẩn Niên snatched the contract from her hand, his expression as cold as ever. Without a word, he turned and walked away. His departure left Kiều An Hảo already exhausted from her cold, unable to sleep. She laid in bed holding the giant teddy bear that was even bigger than her, staring at the ceiling, her mind blank. After a long while, she suddenly thought back to half a year ago, the shock of realizing she had married Lục Cẩn Niên.
Kiều An Hảo and Lục Cẩn Niên had not seen each other for over a year. The last time she laid eyes on him was at Hứa Gia Moc's birthday party, but he didn't notice her. When he arrived, she had quickly sneaked into a dark corner to secretly watch him. At that moment, she had completely lost her confidence in being with him. She had clearly realized that they could never exist together at the same time. However, sometimes fate changes unexpectedly, drawing them closer together. The reason they could be in the same place was because of one person, Hứa Gia Mộc. Hứa Gia Mộc, the only heir to the Hữu family, was like a character in a romance novel, someone who could command the rain and wind, truly the favored child of destiny. But 7 months ago, after driving under the influence one late night, he had an accident. That night, his Bugatti Veyron flipped twice on a bridge. The front of the car crushed beyond recognition. By the time rescuers found him, his breath was already weak. The tragic accident quickly became headline news. For a short while, everyone was talking about how the heir to the Hữu family had died. For the Hữu family, the heir's position was extremely important. The accident sent the family stocks plummeting, almost to the point of being frozen. To save their stocks, the Hữu family announced that Hứa Gia Mộc had not died. While he hadn't died, he might as well have. He fell into a coma and was unable to wake up. Doctors said he could regain consciousness, but they had no idea when. For the media and outsiders, the Hữu family's continual evasion only made things worse. In the end, the Hữu family resorted to an extreme measure, replacing Hứa Gia Mộc with someone else. That person was Lục Cẩn Niên. The reason was simple. Lục Cẩn Niên and Hứa Gia Mộc were half-brothers, sharing the same father, and their faces were nearly identical. But the resemblance wasn't perfect. To cover up the difference, the Hữu family claimed that Hứa Gia Mộc had been disfigured in the accident and then fabricated a large scar on Lục Cẩn Nien's face. The switch was eventually successful. Everyone believed Hứa Gia Mộc was still alive, and the atmosphere at the Hữu family gradually warmed up.
Kiều An Hảo had no idea about this. She still believed Hứa Gia Mộc had truly awakened, and in her happiness, she rushed to the hospital, overjoyed that her childhood friend had miraculously survived. She cried while hugging him. It wasn't until Hứa Gia Moc's mother, Han Nu-so, invited her out that she learned the truth. The person she had hugged in the hospital was not Hứa Gia Mộc, but Lục Cẩn Niên, who had been pretending to be him. The relationship between the Hữu family and the Kiều family had always been close, often collaborating in business, and Han Nu-so had always been kind to Kiều An Hảo. That afternoon, sitting across from her, Han Nu-so, with red-rimmed eyes, held Kiều An Hảo hand and explained that because of Hứa Gia Moc's accident, many members of the Hữu family's board of directors wanted to withdraw their investments. The only solution they had was to arrange a marriage. However, Since the public believed Hứa Gia Mộc had been disfigured, no noblewoman would marry him, Han Yu-so pleaded for Kiều An Hảo to help by marrying the impersonator Lục Cẩn Niên. Kiều An Hảo was stunned by the news. She couldn't process it at first, so she asked for time to think it over. Han Yu-so didn't push her, but requested one thing: she keep their conversation a secret from the Kiều family. Kiều An Hảo agreed, understanding the gravity of the situation. Exposing this secret could ruin the Hứa family. After leaving Han Yu-so, Kiều An Hảo spent a long time thinking. This opportunity was like fate placing a chance right in front of her. She always dreamed of marrying Lục Cẩn Niên, but she never thought it would happen. Though it meant marrying as Hứa Gia Moc's wife, it was her only chance to be close to Lục Cẩn Niên. She knew if she didn't agree, they likely never cross paths again. After much internal conflict, she called Han Yu-so and agreed, with the condition that their marriage would remain private, known only to the board and key partners. Han Yu-so quickly agreed, and so Kiều An Hảo and Lục Cẩn Niên became husband and wife. There was no official marriage certificate, but they held a simple wedding with a small number of guests, just business partners from the Hứa family. On their wedding night, Kiều An Hảo tried to be especially considerate of Lục Cẩn Niên. She promised not to disturb him, to not affect his life, and to keep their marriage a secret from everyone. Then she added, since they were only pretending to be married, they wouldn't do anything inappropriate. She thought these words would meet his expectations, and they did. After hearing her words, Lục Cẩn Niên stared at her for a long moment before coldly replying, "Remember what you said," and then turned to go into the bathroom. Since Hứa Gia Mộc was still in a coma, the Hứa family knew that even though Lục Cẩn Niên could impersonate him, it was still a lie. They tried to keep Hứa Gia Mộc from appearing in public as much as possible, except in necessary circumstances. Therefore, as the wife of Hứa Gia Mộc, Kiều An Hảo didn't have to live with Lục Cẩn Niên daily. They could live separate lives and meet only when necessary, playing the role of a loving married couple. The Kiều family had no idea about the true nature of Kiều An Hảo marriage. After the wedding, she moved out of her uncle's house, not wanting to stay in the Hứa family mansion. She rented a place but was afraid of being discovered, so Lục Cẩn Niên offered for her to stay in his villa in Cam Tu Vien. The reason was simple. Both he and Hứa Gia Mộc had bought houses there, and their villas were next to each other. So when Kiều An Hảo entered, people would assume she was visiting Hứa Gia Mộc. Also, Lục Cẩn Niên could use the opportunity to portray Hứa Gia Mộc when necessary. A perfect arrangement. However, the one thing that bothered Kiều An Hảo, but also brought her some joy, was that the villa only had one bed. So when Lục Cẩn Niên came home, she had no choice but to sleep in the same bed with him. Kiều An Hảo spent the night thinking about many things, but by the morning, she couldn't remember exactly how she fell asleep. She was woken by voices downstairs. Startled, she quickly got up, threw on a robe, and went downstairs. To her surprise, she saw someone moving a bed, under the direction of Ma Tran, placing it in a room on the first floor. Ma Tran, Lục Cẩn Nien's housekeeper, always treated Kiều An Hảo as the mistress of the house, not knowing the truth about the marriage. "Good morning, Mrs. Liao," Ma Tran greeted her with a smile. Kiều An Hảo, confused, asked, "What's going on?" as she looked at the new bed. "It's Mr. Luke's request," Ma Tran explained, pointing to the kitchen. "He said you both have filming schedules, so he wanted me to come look after the house." She then added, "I've made breakfast, Mrs. Liao. Please wash up and come eat." Mr. Luke asked me to come, Ma Tran explained while pointing to the kitchen. "He said both you and Mr. Luke have filming to do, and no one was around to watch the house, so he asked me to come take care of it." Kiều An Hảo had been staying at Lục Cẩn Nien's villa for over 6 months, and during the 3 months of filming Đi Lao Thiên Hoàng, she hadn't returned to Cam Tu Vien. The villa had been empty the entire time, and Lục Cẩn Niên hadn't bothered to hire anyone to look after the house. Yet now, unexpectedly, Matron was called to help. Though Kiều An Hảo was puzzled, she didn't dwell on it. After all, Lục Cẩn Niên had always been unpredictable, and his intentions were hard for her to decipher. Since Matron arrived, the fridge had been filled with fresh produce, meat, and fruits. Not only was Matron thorough in keeping things clean, but she cooked exceptionally well. Upon hearing Kiều An Hảo hoarse voice from her cold, Matron made her a nourishing soup to help her recover. Kiều An Hảo, well cared for by Matron, was fully recovered just in time to return to the set the following day. Having been bedridden for 2 days, Kiều An Hảo hadn't left the house. Now that she felt better, her mood also lifted. While having breakfast, she looked out the floor-to-ceiling windows and noticed the flowers in the backyard garden blooming. After finishing her meal, she decided to go for a walk. Although it wasn't summer, the sun was still intense. Seeing Kiều An Hảo heading out unprepared, Matron rushed over with an umbrella. "Madam, the sun is strong. Please take this umbrella." Kiều An Hảo, who didn't mind the sun, was about to decline, but accepted it when she saw how harsh the sunlight was. Later, as Matron cleaned, she heard the door open, thinking Kiều An Hảo had returned. "Back already, madam?" Hearing this, Lục Cẩn Niên, who was at the entrance changing his shoes, furrowed his brows. Where did she go? Matron was startled by his voice, so she quickly turned to greet him before answering. "She's out for a walk in the garden." Lục Cẩn Niên didn't respond. As he placed his keys on the entryway shelf, he went upstairs. Matron watched him head toward the elevator, then hesitated before asking, "Mr. Luke, should I call her in?" Lục Cẩn Niên paused before answering coldly, "No need." With that, he entered the elevator and went upstairs.